I sat in the back row of the elementary school auditorium, my hands trembling slightly as I watched my 12-year-old son Logan adjust the microphone on stage. The Mother's Day ceremony had been going beautifully so far, with children reading poems and singing songs about the women who raised them. My heart swelled with pride as I saw Logan's confident posture, his dark hair neatly combed for the occasion. He had been so excited about this speech for weeks, practicing in front of the bathroom mirror every morning before school. I had helped him with some of the words, suggesting he speak from the heart about what motherhood meant to him. Little did I know that my own heart was about to be shattered into a million pieces by the very child I had devoted my entire life to protecting and nurturing. The auditorium fell silent as Logan cleared his throat and began to speak. His voice carried clearly through the room, confident and strong, just like I had taught him to be when addressing a crowd. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his eyes scanning the audience filled with mothers, grandmothers, and caregivers. "Today we celebrate Mother's Day, a special day dedicated to the women who brought us into this world and raised us with love." I felt my chest tighten with anticipation, wondering what beautiful words he would share about our journey together. For 7 years, since he was 5 years old, I had been his everything. I had bandaged his scraped knees, helped him with homework until late at night, attended every soccer game and school play, and held him when nightmares made him cry. I had sacrificed my own dreams, my own relationships, my own life to make sure he felt loved and secure. Logan's next words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. "But I want to talk about something important today," he continued, his voice growing stronger and more determined. "Today is for real mothers, the women who carried us for 9 months, who gave birth to us, who have that special bond that only biological mothers can have." The room remained silent, but I could feel my world beginning to crumble around me. My hands gripped the edge of my seat so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Where was this coming from? Who had put these ideas in his head? I had always been honest with Logan about his adoption, explaining it in age-appropriate ways as he grew older. I thought he understood that love, not biology, made a family. I thought he knew that I was his mother in every way that mattered. "Men don't get gifts today," Logan declared with conviction, and I watched in horror as several people in the audience began to nod in agreement. "And neither should people who just happened to take care of us because they had to." The words felt like daggers piercing my heart, each syllable a reminder of how completely I had failed to make him understand the depth of my love for him. I had given up everything for this child, my career as a nurse, my social life, even my relationship with my own family, who had questioned my decision to adopt a troubled 5-year-old whose mother had abandoned him. I had fought through sleepless nights when he had panic attacks, through aggressive phases when he would hit and scream, through years of therapy and patience and unconditional love. And now, in front of a room full of people, he was reducing all of that to someone who just happened to take care of him. The applause that followed was like thunder in my ears, drowning out the sound of my own heartbeat. Parents and teachers clapped enthusiastically, some even standing up to show their appreciation for Logan's mature perspective on motherhood. I sat frozen in my seat, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to process what had just happened. The woman next to me leaned over and whispered, "What a wise young man." It's so refreshing to hear a child who understands the importance of biological bonds. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell everyone the truth about who had been there for Logan every single day for the past 7 years. I wanted to remind them of the countless nights I had spent researching his behavioral issues, the thousands of dollars I had spent on therapy and special programs, the way I had learned to cook his favorite foods and sing the lullabies that calmed his fears. Logan continued his speech, talking about the sanctity of biological motherhood and how society should honor only those women who had given birth. With each word, I felt myself becoming smaller, more invisible, more insignificant. The child I had raised, the boy I had loved more than my own life, was erasing me from his story as if I had never existed. I thought about all the Mother's Day cards he had made me over the years, the breakfast in bed he had surprised me with last year, the way he used to introduce me proudly as my mom to his friends. When had that changed? When had I stopped being his mother and become just someone who happened to take care of him? The questions swirled in my mind like a tornado, destroying every happy memory we had built together. As Logan finished his speech and walked off the stage to thunderous applause, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. The trust I thought we had built, the bond I believed was unbreakable, had been revealed as nothing more than an illusion. I had been living in a fantasy where love conquered all, where the family we had created together was real and meaningful. But Logan's words had shown me the truth, that in his mind, I was nothing more than a temporary caregiver, a placeholder until he could reconnect with his real mother. The woman who had abandoned him when he was 5, who had left him traumatized and broken, was somehow more important to him than the woman who had spent 7 years putting him back together piece by piece. The ceremony continued around me, but I heard none of it. I sat in that auditorium chair, surrounded by celebrating families, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. The other children spoke about their mothers with love and gratitude, sharing stories of sacrifice and devotion that mirrored my own experience with Logan. But their words only highlighted the cruel irony of my situation. I had done everything those celebrated mothers had done, and more, yet I remained invisible and unacknowledged. As the final song began and families started to gather for photos and refreshments, I knew that I couldn't stay. I couldn't pretend to smile and celebrate when my heart had just been torn apart by the child I loved most in the world. I stood up quietly and made my way toward the exit, wondering if Logan would even notice I was gone. I drove home from the school in complete silence, my hands shaking so badly that I had to pull over twice to collect myself. The 20-minute drive felt like hours as Logan's words echoed in my mind over and over again. Men don't get gifts today, and neither should people who just happen to take care of us. Each repetition felt like a fresh wound, reopening the pain and making it impossible to think clearly. I kept replaying every moment of our 7 years together, searching for signs that I had missed, clues that would explain how we had arrived at this devastating moment. Had I been too lenient with him? Had I failed to establish proper boundaries? Or worse, had I been fooling myself all along about the strength of our bond? The questions tormented me as I sat in my car outside our small house in Rock Hill, staring at the front door that suddenly felt like the entrance to a stranger's home. When I finally walked inside, the house felt different somehow, as if Logan's words had changed the very atmosphere of our shared space. I looked around at the living room where we had spent countless evenings watching movies together, at the kitchen table where I had helped him with homework every night, at the photo wall filled with pictures of our adventures and milestones. Everything looked the same, but it all felt hollow now, like props in a play where I had been unknowingly acting out a role that meant nothing to the other performer. I sank onto the couch where Logan and I had cuddled during thunderstorms, where I had read him bedtime stories long past the age when most kids stopped wanting them, where just last week he had fallen asleep with his head on my shoulder while we watched his favorite superhero movie. How could the same child who had sought comfort in my arms be the one who had just publicly declared that I wasn't his real mother? The sound of the front door opening made my heart race, and I quickly wiped away the tears I hadn't realized were falling. Logan walked in with his usual after-school energy, dropping his backpack by the door and heading straight for the kitchen. "Hey, Cheryl," he called out cheerfully, using my first name as he had started doing a few months ago. "Did you see my speech? Mrs. Henderson said it was the best one she'd heard in years." His excitement was genuine and infectious, the same enthusiasm he had always shown when sharing his accomplishments with me. But hearing him call me by my first name, something that had seemed like a natural part of growing up just hours ago, now felt like another small rejection, another way of distancing himself from our relationship. I forced myself to respond calmly, even though my voice felt foreign in my own throat. "Yes, I was there," I managed to say, watching as he rummaged through the refrigerator for his usual after-school snack. He seemed completely oblivious to the impact his words had had on me, chattering away about how proud his teacher had been and how several parents had complimented him afterward. I studied his face, looking for any sign that he understood what he had done, any indication that he realized he had just broken my heart in front of a room full of people. But there was nothing, just the same bright, innocent expression he had worn since childhood, the same easy smile that had melted my heart the first day I met him at the adoption agency. It was as if he had delivered a completely different speech, one that hadn't reduced 7 years of my life to meaningless caretaking. The disconnect between his perception and my reality was so vast that I felt like I was looking at a stranger. "Logan," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady, "can we talk about your speech for a minute?" He looked up from his sandwich with mild curiosity, not the slightest bit of concern or awareness in his expression. "What did you mean when you said that today was only for real mothers?" I watched his face carefully, hoping to see some recognition of how those words might have affected me. Instead, he shrugged casually and took another bite of his sandwich. "Well, it's true, isn't it?" he said matter-of-factly. "Mother's Day is for biological mothers, the ones who actually gave birth. That's what makes it special." His tone was so casual, so matter-of-fact, that it was clear he had given this considerable thought and arrived at what he considered a logical conclusion. But the logic that made sense to his 12-year-old mind was destroying everything I thought I knew about our relationship. "But Logan," I pressed gently, my heart pounding as I tried to navigate this conversation without falling apart completely, "what about everything we've shared together? What about all the times I've taken care of you when you were sick, or helped you with your problems, or celebrated your successes?" He looked at me with what seemed like genuine confusion, as if I was asking him to explain something obvious. "That's different, Cheryl," he said, and the use of my first name felt like another small knife to the heart. "You're like my guardian, I guess. You've been really good to me, and I appreciate that. But you're not my mom. My mom is the woman who gave birth to me, even if she's not here right now." The casual way he dismissed 7 years of my life, reducing my role to that of a temporary guardian, made me feel like I was drowning in plain sight. I excused myself and went to my bedroom, closing the door behind me and finally allowing myself to break down completely. The sobs came in waves, each one carrying years of suppressed fears and insecurities about my role in Logan's life. I had always worried that someday he might want to find his biological mother, and I had prepared myself for that possibility. But I had never imagined that he would reject me so completely, that he would reduce our entire relationship to a business transaction where I was simply the hired help. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made, all the dreams I had put on hold, all the love I had poured into raising him. Had any of it mattered to him? Had I been nothing more than a convenient caretaker in his mind? Someone to fill the gap until his real mother returned? The questions tormented me as I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering how I had gotten everything so wrong. As evening approached and I heard Logan moving around the house, getting ready for dinner and homework as if nothing had changed, I realized that I was facing a choice that would define the rest of our relationship. I could continue pretending that his words hadn't devastated me, that I was content to be relegated to the role of guardian rather than mother, or I could find the courage to show him the truth about his past, the truth I had been protecting him from for 7 years, the truth about why his biological mother had really left and what had happened in those crucial early years of his life that he couldn't remember. It was a truth that would change everything between us, but maybe it was time for Logan to understand exactly who had been there for him when his real mother had chosen to walk away. The decision terrified me, but as I listened to him humming in the kitchen, completely unaware of the pain he had caused, I knew that something had to change. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose that surprised me after the emotional devastation of the previous day. I had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying Logan's speech and wrestling with the decision of whether to tell him the truth about his past. By dawn, I had made up my mind. It was time for him to know everything. I couldn't continue living in this painful limbo where I was treated as a temporary caretaker rather than the mother who had saved his life. As I made breakfast, I watched Logan eat his cereal with the same carefree attitude he had shown since coming home from school yesterday. He chatted about his plans for the weekend, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I realized that in protecting him from the harsh realities of his early childhood, I had inadvertently created a fantasy where his biological mother was some kind of saint who had been forced to give him up, rather than the troubled woman who had nearly destroyed his life. "Logan," I said as he finished his breakfast, "I think it's time we had a serious conversation about your mother, your biological mother." He looked up with immediate interest, his eyes lighting up in a way that made my heart ache. This was clearly a topic he had been hoping to discuss for a long time, and I could see the excitement building in his expression. "Really?" he asked eagerly. "Are you finally going to tell me how to find her? I've been thinking about her a lot lately, especially after doing research for my speech yesterday. The enthusiasm in his voice was like a dagger to my heart, but I forced myself to remain calm. I had always known this day would come, but I had hoped it would happen under different circumstances, when he was older and better able to process difficult truths. Instead, his public rejection of me had forced my hand, making this conversation a matter of survival rather than choice. I led him to the living room and sat down across from him, my hands trembling slightly as I prepared to shatter the idealized image he had constructed of the woman who had given birth to him. "Logan, what I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear," I began, watching as his expression shifted from excitement to concern. "The story you think you know about your early childhood isn't complete. There are things I've been protecting you from, things that happened when you were very young that you don't remember." His brow furrowed with confusion, and I could see him trying to piece together what I might be referring to. "What do you mean?" he asked quietly. "I remember living with my mom until I was 5, and then coming to live with you. She had to give me up because she couldn't take care of me anymore, right?" The innocent hope in his voice made what I was about to do feel even more cruel, but I knew it was necessary. "Logan, your biological mother didn't have to give you up," I said gently but firmly. "She abandoned you. When you were 5 years old, she left you alone in your apartment for 3 days while she went on a drug binge with her boyfriend. You were found by neighbors who heard you crying and called the police." I watched as the color drained from his face, his eyes widening with shock and disbelief. "The apartment was filthy. There was no food in the refrigerator, and you were severely malnourished and dehydrated. You had been taking care of yourself for months before that final incident, trying to find food and clean water while she was passed out or gone for days at a time." Each word felt like I was physically hurting him, but I couldn't stop now. He needed to understand the reality of what his real mother had put him through, and why I had fought so hard to give him a different life. The silence that followed was deafening. Logan stared at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that looked like betrayal. "That's not true," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You're lying. My mom loved me. She just couldn't take care of me because she was sick or something. That's what you always told me." I felt my heart breaking all over again, but this time it was for him rather than for myself. "I told you she was sick because you were too young to understand the truth," I explained gently. "She was sick, Logan, but she was sick with addiction. And instead of getting help, instead of putting you first, she chose drugs over her own child. She chose to leave you alone and scared and hungry rather than be the mother you deserved." I could see him struggling to process this information, his 12-year-old mind trying to reconcile the fantasy he had built with the harsh reality I was presenting. "But why didn't you tell me before?" he asked, and I could hear the anger beginning to build in his voice. "Why did you let me think she was some kind of hero who made a sacrifice for my own good?" The accusation in his tone was justified, and I knew I had to take responsibility for my role in creating this painful situation. "Because I wanted to protect you," I said honestly. "When you first came to live with me, you were so traumatized that you couldn't sleep through the night for months. You had panic attacks whenever I left the house, even for a few minutes. You were terrified that I would abandon you too. I thought that if I could help you heal from that trauma without having to relive the details, you would be better off." I paused, watching as tears began to form in his eyes. "I wanted you to feel secure and loved, not angry and abandoned. But maybe I was wrong to keep the truth from you for so long." Logan stood up abruptly and began pacing around the room, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "So you're telling me that everything I said yesterday was wrong?" he asked, his voice rising with emotion. "That I stood up in front of all those people and made a fool of myself defending someone who didn't even care enough to keep me alive?" The pain in his voice was excruciating, and I wanted nothing more than to take him in my arms and comfort him the way I had when he was younger. But I could see that he was too angry and confused to accept comfort from me right now. "You're telling me that while I was up there talking about real mothers and biological bonds, the person who actually raised me was sitting in the audience watching me reject her?" The realization of what he had done was finally hitting him, and I could see the shame and regret beginning to mix with his anger and confusion. "Logan," I said softly, standing up and taking a step toward him, "I never wanted you to find out this way. I was planning to tell you when you were older, when you could better understand the complexities of addiction and mental illness. But after yesterday, After hearing you dismiss our relationship as if it meant nothing, I realized that I couldn't protect you from the truth anymore." He stopped pacing and looked at me with eyes that seemed much older than his 12 years. "I need to see proof," he said quietly. "I need to see the police reports, the social services files, something that proves what you're telling me is true. Because if it is true, then everything I thought I knew about myself is a lie." I nodded, understanding his need for concrete evidence. "I have all the documentation upstairs," I told him. "I've kept everything from your case file, thinking that someday you might want to see it. But Logan, I want you to be prepared. Some of those reports contain details that are very difficult to read, even for adults." I went upstairs to my bedroom closet and retrieved the manila folder I had hoped never to open with Logan present. My hands shook as I carried it downstairs, knowing that the contents would forever change how he saw his past, his biological mother, and most importantly, our relationship. The folder contained police reports, social services documentation, medical records, and photographs that painted a devastating picture of his early childhood. As I placed the folder on the coffee table between us, I saw Logan's eyes fixed on it with a mixture of dread and desperate curiosity. The first document was the initial police report from the day he was found, describing a 5-year-old child who was severely underweight, wearing clothes that hadn't been changed in days, showing signs of prolonged neglect, found trying to eat dry cereal because there was no milk in the refrigerator in an apartment described as uninhabitable, with drug paraphernalia scattered throughout. The silence stretched between us as Logan continued to process everything he had learned, mentally reviewing our 7 years together through this new lens, understanding for the first time that every sacrifice I had made had been the actions of a mother, not a temporary caretaker. "Cheryl," he said finally, and for the first time in months, my name sounded different coming from his lips, softer, more respectful, tinged with gratitude. "I'm so sorry about what I said yesterday. I didn't understand. I didn't know." His voice broke, and I saw tears streaming down his face as the full impact of his Mother's Day speech hit him. I reached out and pulled him into my arms, feeling his body shake with sobs as 7 years of suppressed emotions finally found their release. And for the first time since his speech yesterday, I felt like I had my son back, like the bond we had built was stronger than the confusion and pain that had temporarily driven us apart. 3 weeks later, I sat in the same auditorium where my heart had been broken, but this time, the atmosphere was completely different. The school had organized a special assembly for Logan to deliver a new speech, one that he had insisted on giving to correct the record and honor the truth we had discovered together. As I watched him walk up to that same microphone, my heart swelled with a pride that was deeper and more meaningful than anything I had felt before. He looked older somehow, more mature, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who finally understood his own story. The audience was smaller this time, mostly teachers, a few parents, and some of Logan's classmates who had heard about his request to give another speech. I held my breath as he adjusted the microphone, remembering the devastation I had felt in this exact spot just 3 weeks ago, but knowing that today would be different. 3 weeks ago, I stood at this microphone and said some things that were not only wrong, but deeply hurtful to the person who matters most in my life. Logan began, his voice clear and strong, but filled with an emotion that hadn't been there in his previous speech. I talked about real mothers and biological bonds, not understanding that the realest mother of all was sitting in the back row, listening to me dismiss 7 years of unconditional love and sacrifice. I felt tears beginning to form in my eyes as he continued, his words healing wounds I hadn't even realized were still bleeding. "Today, I want to tell you about my real mother. Not the woman who gave birth to me and then abandoned me when I needed her most, but the woman who chose me, who fought for me, who never gave up on me even when I was difficult and scared and broken." His eyes found mine in the audience, and I saw in them a love and gratitude that made every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt worth it. My real mother is Cheryl, and she's sitting right there, and she deserves to be celebrated not just on Mother's Day, but every single day. The applause that followed was different from the applause 3 weeks ago. It was warmer, more genuine, filled with understanding rather than misguided agreement. Several teachers were wiping away tears, and I saw Mrs. Henderson nodding approvingly as Logan continued his speech. "I learned something important these past few weeks," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Family isn't about biology or blood or who gave birth to whom. Family is about who shows up, who stays, who loves you through the worst times and celebrates with you during the best times." He paused, looking directly at me again. "Family is about who teaches you to ride a bike and helps you with homework and holds you when you have nightmares. Family is about who sacrifices their own dreams to make sure yours can come true. And by that definition, I have the best mother in the world." I was crying openly now, not caring who saw me, feeling a healing in my heart that I hadn't thought was possible just a few weeks ago. The child I had raised, the boy I had loved through every challenge and triumph, was finally seeing me the way I had always hoped he would. As Logan finished his speech and walked off the stage, he didn't head toward his classmates or his teacher like he had 3 weeks ago. Instead, he walked straight to me, his arms open, his face shining with a love that was pure and real and unshakable. "I love you, Mom," he said as he hugged me tightly. And this time the word Mom wasn't just an acknowledgement, it was a declaration, a promise, a recognition of everything we had built together. "I love you too, sweetheart," I whispered back, holding him close and feeling like the luckiest woman in the world. Around us, people were gathering their things and heading home, but we stayed there for a few extra minutes, just holding each other and savoring this moment of perfect understanding. We had been through the fire together, Logan and I, and we had emerged stronger, more connected, and more grateful for the family we had chosen to create. As we finally walked out of that auditorium hand in hand, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, not as a guardian and her charge, but as a mother and son whose bond had been tested and proven unbreakable.